It was called the Tomb by those unlucky enough to be sent there. A place where sunlight was a privilege, silence was policy, and freedom wasn't even a dream because no one ever escaped. Located deep in the desolate mountains of upstate New York, Clinton Correctional Facility had a reputation that sent chills down even the hardest criminals' spines. Known for housing the most dangerous and unpredictable inmates in the country, this maximum security prison wasn't just built to keep prisoners in, it was built to keep hope out. Since its opening in 1845, Clinton had been home to some of America's most notorious criminals: serial killers, drug lords, mob bosses, and mentally disturbed lifers. With 30-foot concrete walls, razor wire coiled like venomous snakes, and armed guard towers every 100 yards, Clinton was a fortress designed for one purpose: containment. On paper, it was unbreachable. In practice, it was a cold, brutal machine designed to crush the human spirit. And yet, in the summer of 2015, that machine malfunctioned. Two inmates, Richard Matt and David Sweat, managed to do the impossible. They escaped. But how? That's the mystery that would soon captivate the nation. Were these men criminal masterminds, or just two lucky thugs in the right place at the right time? The answer lies in the story that began months, maybe even years, before the world ever heard their names. Richard Matt was no ordinary inmate. A career criminal with a history of violence and manipulation, Matt had the charisma of a con man and the temper of a sociopath. He was serving a sentence of 25 years to life for the brutal kidnapping and murder of a man whose dismembered body he dumped in a river. A talented artist and smooth talker, Matt often charmed guards and staff with his paintings and easy banter. But beneath the surface, he was always calculating. His partner in escape, David Sweat, was younger, quieter, and far more methodical. Convicted of murdering a sheriff's deputy in cold blood during a robbery, Sweat was serving life without parole. He was a thinker, a planner, obsessively detail-oriented and cautious. He didn't seek attention like Matt did. He preferred the shadows. Together, they formed a dangerous synergy. Matt was the manipulator, Sweat the engineer. The prison's design didn't allow for error. Each movement of the inmates was monitored, every interaction scrutinized. There were motion sensors, locked steel doors, bed checks, and over 1,000 corrections officers rotating through shifts like clockwork. There hadn't been a successful escape from Clinton Correctional in over a century, and that was by design. Inmates didn't just break out of Clinton. It was where escape plans went to die. Yet somehow, Matt and Sweat saw an opening. It began with a friendship, seemingly innocent, with a civilian employee named Joyce Mitchell, who worked in the prison's sewing shop. A middle-aged mother and wife, Mitchell became emotionally entangled with both inmates. Matt, in particular, knew how to get under her skin and into her confidence. He told her she was special, needed, loved. Sweat played along quietly, letting Matt do the talking. Joyce Mitchell, desperate for attention and excitement, began slipping them contraband, tools, food, and eventually, what would become the key to their escape: hacksaw blades. But even with those, they still faced the near-impossible task of navigating a labyrinth of tunnels, steam pipes, and locked chambers beneath the prison, spaces no inmate was supposed to access. And yet, they did. This wasn't a sudden escape. It was methodical, deliberate, and terrifying in its boldness. Over the course of weeks, perhaps months, they cut their way through cell walls, crawled through tunnels filled with decades of filth and steam, and mapped out a path beneath the prison to freedom, all without anyone noticing. How did the most secure prison in New York fail to see two men literally digging their way out? Was it pure cunning? Was it sheer luck? Or was it something far more disturbing? A system so used to fear that it had stopped paying attention? When the morning bed check came on June 6, 2015, and the guards opened Matt and Sweat's cells, what they found stunned them. Dummies made of sweatshirts and pillows lying under the blankets, and holes in the back walls of both cells. A tunnel, a catwalk, and a missing manhole cover later, and the nightmare had begun. America's most dangerous prison had just been breached, and no one saw it coming. In the cold, calculated world of prison survival, every move is a chess piece, and in the case of Richard Matt and David Sweat, their escape plan was a long game, one that played out right under the noses of the very people hired to keep them locked away forever. To understand how they pulled it off, you have to understand what kind of minds were at work. These weren't impulsive inmates acting on desperation. They were students of routine, observers of behavior, experts in manipulation. And they had time, a lot of it. Richard Matt, with his charm and disarming personality, was the front man. He worked the guards, flattered the staff, and kept everyone thinking he was reformed, even likable. His paintings of celebrities and wildlife were so good, they were framed and displayed in the prison. He'd gift them to guards or trade them for extra favors. Meanwhile, behind that smile, he was studying people, learning when they relaxed, what they ignored, and who could be exploited. David Sweat was the opposite, quiet, intense, and obsessive. Where Matt charmed, Sweat calculated. He was the logistics man, spending hours thinking through the small details, guard rotations, shift changes, hidden maintenance areas, and infrastructure weaknesses. Together, they made a dangerous combination of charisma and calculation. Their first major advantage came through the prison's industrial area, where both inmates worked. The tailor shop, where Joyce Mitchell was a supervisor, gave them tools and proximity to restricted zones. Over time, Joyce, referred to by inmates as Tilly, became the linchpin in their plan. Joyce's vulnerability was no secret. She had a troubled marriage, felt undervalued at home, and was flattered by the attention of two seemingly grateful inmates. Matt preyed on that need. He drew her pictures, whispered compliments, and fed her fantasy. Eventually, she became emotionally entangled, especially with Matt, though she claimed Sweat was involved as well. Mitchell began smuggling in items, frozen hamburger meat with tools hidden inside, including hacksaw blades, chisels, and screwdrivers. These tools were essential in cutting through the steel backplates of their cells. To muffle the sound, the men timed their sawing during loud times, shift changes, or when generators roared beneath the prison. They even covered their cell walls with posters to hide their progress, echoing a trick used in the film The Shawshank Redemption, a movie they were well aware of. Bit by bit, they carved a route through steel walls into the catwalk behind their cells. From there, they descended into a network of steam tunnels and maintenance corridors that hadn't been inspected in decades. The tunnels were hot, dark, and barely navigable, but they led, ultimately, outside the prison walls. And here's where Sweat's genius came in. He began sketching out the underground maze, memorizing each twist, valve, and panel. For weeks they explored the tunnel system, cutting through grates, mapping out exit points, and testing security weaknesses. They stored tools in the tunnels. They marked safe areas. They wore stolen civilian clothes under their uniforms. They even practiced moving through the route at night so they could time every move. Everything was planned, except for one critical element. Joyce Mitchell was supposed to be their getaway driver. The plan was for her to park her car near a manhole outside the prison on the night of the escape, pick them up, and drive to a remote cabin stocked with supplies. But when the night came, June 6, 2015, Mitchell panicked. The reality of aiding two convicted murderers suddenly became too real. She never showed up. Matt and Sweat were now free men, but on foot, in the dark, with only the clothes on their backs and whatever they could carry. The question now wasn't just how they escaped. It was, how long could they stay free? And what would they do to avoid going back? In a prison where every second is monitored and every hallway echoes with authority, the moments following Richard Matt and David Sweat's disappearance became a ticking clock, one they hoped wouldn't strike before they were miles away from Clinton Correctional Facility. It began in the dead of night on June 6, 2015. The prison was still, lights low, guards halfway through their overnight rotations. Matt and Sweat made their move with surgical precision, slipping through holes in the backs of their adjoining cells, holes they had spent weeks secretly cutting with smuggled hacksaw blades. Behind the cells was a maintenance catwalk, an area supposedly inaccessible to inmates. They used makeshift lighting fashioned from contraband to illuminate their path. From there, they descended into the steam tunnels, a labyrinth of rusted pipes, hot vents, and decaying infrastructure that wound beneath the prison like veins under skin. The temperature inside those tunnels soared above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but the men pressed forward, crawling for hours through suffocating darkness, guided by memory and sweat-damp maps drawn in secret. Every corner posed a risk. A wrong turn, a sudden noise, a missed patrol above. They knew any mistake would mean immediate capture or death. The final stretch required them to cut through a thick chain and a steel grate that led to a manhole cover just outside the prison's 30-foot wall. Once they reached the cover, they used a stolen sledgehammer to strike it open from below. The manhole led up to a quiet street in the sleepy town of Dannemora, New York. They emerged just before dawn, covered in grime, shaking from exertion, but free for the first time in decades. Their plan, up to that point, had been flawless. Except one thing was missing: the car. Joyce Mitchell, who had promised to wait near the exit, never showed. Paralyzed by guilt and fear, she backed out at the last moment and checked herself into a hospital, claiming panic attacks. Matt and Sweat were suddenly fugitives on foot, carrying nothing but the clothes they wore and a rudimentary survival plan. They moved quickly, disappearing into the dense forests of upstate New York. The Adirondacks offered thick cover, thousands of square miles of woods, rivers, and abandoned hunting cabins, but they were unarmed, hungry, and hunted. At 5:30 a.m., the prison's routine bed check triggered alarm bells. Guards found the dummies in the beds, pillowheads, folded blankets, then the holes, then the tunnels. The manhunt was on. Within hours, the small town of Dannemora became the epicenter of one of the most intense searches in modern U.S. history. Over 1,500 law enforcement officers, including state police, U.S. Marshals, Border Patrol, and the FBI, fanned out across the countryside with helicopters, thermal imaging drones, K-9 units, and roadblocks. They searched cabins, combed rivers, and questioned locals. But the escapees were ghosts. What followed was a cat-and-mouse game that lasted 3 full weeks, during which Matt and Sweat survived on stolen food, rainwater, and supplies taken from seasonal cabins. They split up at one point, possibly a strategic move, or maybe due to growing tension. Matt had become erratic, loud, sloppy. He reportedly tried to carjack a camper. He broke into a cabin, leaving behind DNA and a mess. That carelessness became his undoing. On June 26, 2015, a Border Patrol tactical team found Matt near Malone, New York, about 20 miles from the Canadian border. Armed with a stolen shotgun, he refused to surrender and was shot and killed. After nearly 3 weeks on the run, his story ended in a hail of bullets. Sweat, still on the move, was captured 2 days later. A New York state trooper spotted him walking along a road just 2 miles from the border. When Sweat ran, the officer fired, striking him twice in the torso. He survived and was immediately taken back into custody. Their freedom had lasted 22 days, but the questions they raised about prison security, human error, and just how far cunning and luck can take you would linger for years to come. When the news broke that 2 convicted murderers had escaped from one of America's most secure prisons, the country was stunned. For the small town of Dannemora, it was like a bomb had gone off. Residents locked their doors, schools closed, and state troopers patrolled quiet streets that hadn't seen a serious crime in decades. But it wasn't just a local panic. It became a national obsession. The escape was headline news on every major network. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they all sent reporters to stand outside the gates of Clinton Correctional Facility. The story had everything: murderers on the loose, a love triangle inside the prison walls, corruption, betrayal, and the terrifying possibility that these men could be anywhere. Overnight, Matt and Sweat became household names, faces plastered across news bulletins, and wanted posters from New York to California. As the manhunt stretched into days, then weeks, tensions soared. Governor Andrew Cuomo, who visited the prison hours after the escape was discovered, called the breach a crisis of massive proportions. The state deployed over 1,500 officers and spent an estimated $23 million on the search. It became the most expensive manhunt in New York history. Helicopters hovered over forests. Tactical teams combed swamps. K-9 units tracked scent trails that went cold in the mud. At night, residents were kept awake by the constant thrum of searchlights sweeping through trees. In some areas, police went door to door with rifles drawn, urging people to stay indoors. The escapees had become ghosts, but dangerous ones. Everyone was asking the same question: if they could get out of that prison, what else were they capable of? As pressure mounted, the investigation turned inward. Clinton Correctional wasn't just facing embarrassment, it was under fire. The focus quickly turned to Joyce Mitchell, the civilian employee who had developed intimate relationships with both men. Investigators discovered she had smuggled in hacksaw blades, chisels, and even a screwdriver hidden inside packages of frozen meat. She'd also provided maps, sewing needles, and other tools. Her original plan, as revealed in court testimony, was to pick up the escapees after they emerged from the manhole and drive them to a remote cabin. When the time came, though, she panicked. Instead of following through, she checked herself into a hospital, citing nervous breakdown symptoms. Mitchell was arrested and charged with promoting prison contraband and criminal facilitation. She ultimately pled guilty and was sentenced to 2 to 7 years in prison. The public viewed her as a traitor, a woman whose need for attention and excitement had nearly cost lives. But she wasn't the only one under scrutiny. Corrections officer Gene Palmer, who had unwittingly helped smuggle in tools hidden in the frozen meat Joyce provided, was also charged. Though Palmer claimed he had no idea what was inside, he admitted to bending the rules for Matt, allowing the inmate special privileges in exchange for paintings and flattery. He would later plead guilty to a felony and serve time. The Department of Corrections launched a full internal investigation. The findings were damning: systemic failures, staff complacency, lax oversight, and corruption. Reports showed that security checks were skipped. Inmates were left unsupervised for long periods. Tools and supplies weren't properly logged. The very routines the prison relied on to maintain order had become its Achilles heel. In the aftermath, dozens of prison employees were disciplined, some suspended, others fired. The scandal reached the highest levels of the correction system and triggered a wave of reforms aimed at tightening security and oversight in all New York State prisons. For the public, though, one thing was clear. This hadn't just been a daring escape. It was a massive institutional failure, and it had happened in a facility once thought to be impenetrable. Matt was dead. Sweat was back behind bars. Mitchell was behind a different set of walls. But the scars they left behind, on the community, the prison system, and public trust, wouldn't heal quickly. The escape of Richard Matt and David Sweat wasn't just a breach of prison walls. It was a breach of belief. For decades, maximum security prisons like Clinton Correctional Facility were considered escape-proof. Yet, in June 2015, 2 inmates slipped out through tunnels and pipes with nothing more than time, tools, and an inside accomplice. The question that lingered long after their recapture wasn't how they escaped. We know that now. But rather, was it the result of brilliant cunning or just dumb luck? At first glance, it seems like a masterstroke of criminal ingenuity. The plan was bold and complex. It involved months of stealth, manipulation, and labor. Matt and Sweat memorized guard schedules, exploited blind spots, and carved through steel unnoticed. They navigated an ancient network of tunnels, avoided detection, and emerged into the outside world undetected. That's no small feat. David Sweat, in particular, demonstrated a level of planning that impressed even veteran law enforcement officers. He created detailed mental maps of the underground passageways, practiced the escape route repeatedly, and managed logistical elements like tool storage, timing, and escape attire. This wasn't desperation, it was discipline. Some experts compared it to military-level recon work, but even the smartest plan can collapse under the weight of a single bad decision. And that's where luck, or perhaps the failure of others, played an equally large role. For one, the entire escape hinged on Joyce Mitchell's emotional vulnerability and poor judgment. Had she not been susceptible to Matt's manipulation, there would have been no hacksaws, no contraband, no escape. And let's be clear, had she actually followed through with picking them up, the story could have ended far more tragically. Their goal wasn't just to flee the state, it was to cross the Canadian border and vanish. Secondly, the escape worked because of a systemic failure in the prison itself. Routine security checks weren't done properly. Staff allowed inmates like Matt special privileges, such as unsupervised access to the catwalk area for painting. Tools went missing and were never accounted for. Walls went unchecked. There was even a reported failure to respond to repeated warning signs, like unusual behavior from Mitchell and inmate complaints that went ignored. In that sense, the success of the escape seems less like a testament to genius and more like a tragedy of complacency. The inmates didn't outsmart a perfect system, they exploited a deeply flawed one. And yet you can't ignore the boldness of what they pulled off. In a prison designed to eliminate hope, they found a way out. That takes something more than luck. Call it cunning, call it madness, or call it pure survival instinct. Whatever it was, it worked for 22 days. But that's where the genius ends. Once on the outside, Matt became reckless. He made noise, left a trail, got drunk, broke into cabins, waved a shotgun. That behavior got him killed. Sweat was more careful, but without shelter, food, or real support, his survival window was closing fast. Ultimately, their story became a case study in contrasts: skill versus sloppiness, planning versus panic manipulation versus delusion. So was it cunning or luck? It was both. Matt and Sweat demonstrated cunning in how they planned and executed the escape. But without the careless mistakes and emotional weaknesses of prison staff, and without Mitchell's misguided loyalty, none of it would have been possible. Luck gave them an opening, but it was their intelligence, patience, and nerve that let them walk through it. And while the prison has since doubled down on security and made systemic reforms, the legacy of the 2015 escape is a chilling reminder. Even the strongest walls can fall when no one's watching.